Welcome, everyone. I'm Joe Sapienti, and I'm the Associate Vice President of Case for Quality Collaborative Community at MDIC. I'll be your moderator today for our session on the digital health panel discussion, and we'll be talking about digital health in terms of the diversity of this program, digital health, and we'll be talking to a number of our panel members. With us today, we have a very distinguished group of panel members from FDA, industry, patient advocacy, technology developers, and MDIC. So to get ourselves started, I'd like to welcome Cassie Scherer. Cassie is the Director of Regulatory Policy US and a member of the Global Regulatory Policy Group at Medtronic. We have Eric Friedman, who is the co-founder of Fitbit and is Fitbit's Vice President of Research at Google. We have Heidi Dosch. Heidi is the founder of Tour de Heart. And as the founder of Tour de Heart, it's a nonprofit organization to inspire people living with heart issues. She is a patient. She is 100% dependent on a pacemaker and has been for greater than 30 plus years. And she is also a competitive cyclist and an Ironman athlete and finisher. I want to make sure we emphasize that she finished the Ironman as well. But Heidi's a patient advocate, and she's also an ambassador for providing the patient experience. And I think the important thing here is to acknowledge that we brought her in to make sure that we are acknowledging in a proactive way the value of that patient experience, whether we're talking about improving healthcare or improving patient experience. With me also today is Bakul Patel. Bakul is the Director of Digital Health Center of Excellence. He's also the Director of the Digital Health Division Center for Devices and Radiological Health at FDA. We also have my colleague Jitesh Vidal. He is the Program Director at Data Science and Technology and my co-partner in the digital health vertical. And then John Hunt, who is the Vice President of Clinical Science and Technology. So today what we'd like to do is spend some time talking about the digital health landscape and how broad it is and how it runs very wide and very deep across the ecosystem of medical devices. We'll talk about the sources of that data as well as the diversity of that information as we collect it and what we do with it. I mentioned the value of the patient insights as part of the digital health initiative. And we'll also talk now about the MDIC digital health vertical. And I'd like to hand it off to John Hunt, and he'll take us through an overview of MDIC and our vision for the digital health vertical. So John?
Thank you, Joe. Hello, everyone. As Joe said, I'm John Hunt, Vice President of Clinical Science and Technology at MDIC. And one of the things I noticed when we started first talking about digital health, and thanks to Bakul, it's front and center in my mind. I had a call a few months ago in March with someone from a large tech company, and I was encouraging him to get involved with MDIC. And one of his statements was, "Are you going to set up a digital health initiative?" And so I quickly rendezvoused with Bakul and Annie Saha at FDA, and they gave us a two thumbs up and a quick endorsement that this would be a very good option. So first, I'm going to give you a quick overview of MDIC. We are a 501c3 public-private partnership created with the sole objective of advancing regulatory science of medical devices for patient benefit through multiple pre-competitive regulatory science projects. And as you can see in this Venn diagram, we're a combination of government entities that are members of MDIC, industry members from the devices, diagnostics, and digital health industries, and nonprofits, so patients, providers, and academics. And we have a tremendously diverse ecosystem. MDIC has 66 participating member organizations, And we pull on over 300 subject matter experts involved in the working groups that we currently have actively underway at MDIC. We have, as I've indicated here, over 35 active working groups and committees across the various programs. And one of the things we generate is a lot of rich content in the forms of white papers, frameworks, templates for clinical trials, and so on. And those are all accessible and publicly available in our digital resource library on our website. So if we look at the core initiatives and program areas within MDIC, you can see these are split into 5 areas: clinical science, data science and technology, which fall under my department, if you like. We have health economics and patient value. We have the NEST Coordinating Center, which is a collaborative community. And then we're standing up a new initiative within the clinical science and technology business unit, if you like, in advanced manufacturing. So one of the things my team and I have been discussing in detail is, given the scope of the programs and projects that we currently have underway, where do they tie into digital health? And as you can see from this slide, we have a number of programs that are currently very active: cybersecurity, computational modeling and simulation, external evidence methods, augmented reality, virtual reality, medical extended reality, artificial intelligence, machine learning. And it became very obvious to my team that in the process of creating these regulatory grade tools and methods, that digital health cuts across many of these programs. And when you look to the right side of this slide with the 5G enabled health technologies, advanced manufacturing, pathology innovation, collaborative community, which is moving pathology from the microscope age to the digital age, you can see there are a lot of synergies across these programs with this digital health initiative. So when we looked at these synergies, obviously we engaged with Bakul and Annie at FDA to discuss setting up this vertical. And Bakul encouraged us, time is of the essence. So we took him literally, because effectively we're standing this initiative up in less than 3 months. We had our initial discussions with tech companies that were interested in joining MDIC in mid-March. So here we are in early June, already getting this underway. And one of the things that Joe and Jitesh have done already is sent out a survey to our stakeholder community, received that feedback, and already crafted a charter for this digital health initiative. And you can see here the objective for the digital health vertical within MDIC is to collaboratively and strategically advance science and evidence for high quality digital health technologies in an efficient, risk-based approach, leveraging new relationships with developers, patients, and providers to shape and inform the regulatory strategies, policies, and processes to accelerate digital health innovation, drive synergies, and advance best practices. So what we're planning to do within Jitesh's realm, he's currently the program director for data science and technology, and we're going to reboot that to become more contemporary with current state of the art and rebrand this as a digital health and technology programs, which will incorporate current and new initiatives under this new core program of digital health and technology. And you can see the programs we've already identified. Currently, some are ongoing and some will be set up by this fall, advanced manufacturing being one. And you can see there's a tremendous scope and breadth of projects here. And I think the interesting thing from our perspective is digital health spans this program spectrum horizontally rather than vertically. So even though we're calling it a digital health vertical, I view it as a digital health horizontal across our existing programs. With that, Joe, I'll turn it back to you and let you go ahead and moderate the session.
Great. Thank you, John. I'd like to welcome our panel members as we start the session for the Q&A. Welcome, everyone. So it wouldn't be appropriate for me to start a digital health conversation without putting my first question to Bakul. But I will tailor it a little bit and ask Cassie to sort of weigh in on the same question as well. But Bakul, we've had a number of conversations about how broad and deep digital health is across the ecosystem. But clearly we want to establish some early wins. So can you kind of give us your perspective on what you think may be some opportunities for early wins? And similar, Cassie, to think about what you think from an industry perspective, what the early wins might look like for us.
Joe, thank you so much for this panel. And John, nicely set up there with the background that you laid out and the work that's happening at MDIC. I want to take a little step back and just talk about when we speak the words digital health, I think about it in very broad terms, right? I think we should include healthcare that's going digital, and then from there you can start thinking about, being part of life is really one of the main aspects of digital health that's happening. That's why you see Heidi and Eric here on this panel to talk about how engagement can happen through technology that we're all getting used to, and we start bringing together folks that are actually really driving and fostering this healthcare paradigm that is digital. So when we sort of take that into perspective and say, there is a role for FDA because health and care, when it comes down to medical products, comes down to this fundamental aspects of assuring safety and effectiveness, as we all know, has been our bread and butter at FDA. Joe, you asked me the question, like, what should we get started with? And I think I'll throw out a few ideas on the table. Obviously, there's plenty to work from, and as John, adequately pointed out, there's so many things that's going on today. At the very minimum, I think we need to start thinking about how can we touch those different stakeholders in a meaningful way so we add value. So with that framing in mind, I can just say a couple things, right? So one, from an FDA perspective, we do struggle with thinking about how should that new paradigm, the regulatory paradigm, look like. So I think there's a value conversation around that we can work on as a group to think about, why the need for a new paradigm? What is it that we need to sort of foster? So that's number one. Number two, I would start thinking about, there's so much duplication that exists today that folks are doing when they're starting to bring consumer technology to healthcare or in the world of medical devices. Once that evidence commons starts to shape up, and I would throw that out as an idea for us to start thinking about how can we reuse the work that's done in one area and leverage it again for another area. And I'll to be more tangible, right? If you're using a wearable to measure some outcome, or measure an endpoint like gait, for example, how can that validation can be reused in another area where gait is the measure that can be used for some other disease or condition? So what's that indication agnostic validation look like? Can be leveraged in a pre-competitive way that people can reuse and start working? And I think this is where MDIC can be really, really powerful in sort of bringing the community and working in this pre-competitive areas.
Okay, Cassie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, and first of all, thank you again for inviting me to this panel. I'm so excited to be part of this esteemed panel and the digital health vertical. And I think I'll echo, a lot of what Bakul said. As we know, I can brag about all the work that Bakul has done. FDA has already taken a number of important steps in recent years to advance digital health. including building up the framework for the pre-certification, pre-cert pilot program, and the action plan on AI ML technologies. Also, I just want to note, we talked about Bakul's title for the Director for Digital Health Center of Excellence, but that was stood up as a centralized resource to help build partnerships to accelerate regulation in digital health development. And as we know, under the DHCOE, are several programs that we're talking about again today, including the pre-cert pilot program, AI ML, and cybersecurity. So CDRH stood this up, recognizing a need to sort of facilitate collaboration and synergies in regulatory science and digital health and advance harmonization in this area. And so one of the things that I'm really excited about with this new MDIC digital health vertical is sort of to echo what Bakul says, really to give us the opportunity to make similar connections across the stakeholders. I look at this panel with me and Bakul and Heidi and Eric all coming together to share our perspectives and build upon each other. And it's really an exciting time in the industry and across patients, physicians, healthcare, and to collaborate, when looking to further regulatory science for digital health. What I think is important when I look at the future of digital health and innovating the regulatory pathway and regulatory science is one, to think more broadly across product types in our research and development of solutions. We talk, I think a lot of what's come out so far from FDA has been, focus on software as a medical device. And then with some of the AI action plan that's come out, recognition of some of this also applies to software in a medical device, but really to start thinking across the whole spectrum and what we can build across the whole spectrum. Also the risk continuum of the healthcare products too, from wearables, non-regulated, low-risk devices, wellness products, to higher risk devices such as implantables. How can we build upon the data that's coming out of all this technology? And then finally, across the whole care continuum, and I know Heidi's going to get a little bit more into this later, with looking from preventative to diagnosis to treatment and to post-care. Digital tools are really going to provide an opportunity for us to look at the holistic view of patient health. Just a couple more things. I think Bakul is already and his team have already done such great work to build on the pre-cert framework. And I think within MDIC, we're going to be able to make a lot of connections to work that's already been done in other contexts to help further inform the different components of the pre-cert model, from the excellence appraisal through review determination through real world performance. And for example, looking into what work that we can look from case for quality to help build into the excellent appraisal for pre-cert. Also, considering whether we can develop a more clear and consistent mechanism to be able to utilize real world data as evidence for post-market monitoring and performance, as well as software pre-market submissions. We know that there's a huge value in collection of real world data to provide access to a more diverse and broader patient population, and the use of real world evidence to provide more insights and clinical outcomes. So how can we continue to build upon this work to provide the ability to use real world evidence more consistently across the total product lifecycle of the device and the patient healthcare continuum?
Great, thank you, Cassie and Bakul. So I'm going to go over to Eric for a moment and kind of get your perspective. Eric, when you think about the role that you played in as a co-founder of Fitbit and now with your research in Fitbit, and Cassie talked a little bit about the wearables and collecting data. What are your thoughts, or what does Fitbit think about that as a healthcare research and advancing research and health research?
So first of all, Fitbit has always been about making the world a healthier place, and it's definitely been an interesting journey as we've gone, we've progressed. In the early days of Fitbit, we had people using Fitbits to walk more and lose weight or kind of manage their diet and get to a healthier state. People would write in, "You saved my life because of I'm type 2 diabetic. You helped me lose 50 pounds. I'm therefore going to be there for my kids and my grandkids." Isn't that just brings joy to your face? And as we started launching things like heart rate and other of these metrics, the tenor of the messages started changing. We kept getting those messages, and it's great work on a product where people write you thank you notes. And I think that probably many of us on this call are fortunate enough to work in such an environment. But we started getting messages like, "Hey, my heart rate was saying 150 beats per minute. I was sitting there driving my car. I figured my Fitbit must be broken. I was going to write customer support. I drove along. It still said 150 beats per minute. I said, well, maybe I should go to the doctor and just to be safe. Drove to the doctor said, good thing you showed up. Otherwise you would have been dead soon because you've got some kind of condition. And, we thought a lot about Fitbit about, how do we kind of, rather than just being somebody who kind of shows data and doesn't provide any judgment on it, how do we actually kind of help people become healthier, and how do we kind of proactively take a role in changing that health? And so if we then translate that into the research, a lot of the stuff that the research team is working on is, in addition to what new metrics we can figure out and measure that might be useful to a user, how do we make those metrics useful to the user? And how do we help them and their doctors engage together to find a good path to health? So some things I'm finding very exciting in the short term. So we just wrapped up a clinical trial of a mere 455,000 people were in our clinical trial as we started working to, it was a heart trial, studying AFib. And, looking at heart data and like trying to figure out how do you help that many people, it's just, that's really exciting. And also, how do you run a trial at scale during COVID, which is a really interesting experience. And in some ways, actually, COVID almost made it a little bit easier because people also start getting used to the idea of telemedicine. How do I interact with my doctor digitally? How do I interact with medicine digitally? And in some ways, we were just kind of riding along those rails. And at the same time, we do a lot of our own research. Fitbit has also been a device used in a large amount of academic research. Over 900 academic papers have been published using Fitbits. And so there's a lot of a whole body of knowledge that's been developed. And we're excited to both support both for internally in ourselves, like developing new products, partnering with kind of academic researchers, and also even partnering with third-party companies, like other companies helping to gather data. As Cassie touched on, the whole how do you do in-market surveillance? Nice thing about things like Fitbit, Fitbit in particular, but other things like that, is we're leading in an increasingly connected space, which means us as companies, we have to really focus on securing and protecting that user data and making sure it's very clear to the user how we're using it, but also allows us to understand who our users are, how our users are using it, how are we performing in the field in real life conditions. You develop something in the Northeast, or well, actually where I'm from, California, well, San Francisco, any time of the year, it's 60 degrees. Take it to muggy Alabama in the middle of summer. Does it behave the same way? A, we make sure we develop it. B, we look at across all of our products to see that it's behaving the same way. And C, we get to keep doing that research to figure out how is it performing in the field as conditions change. And I think it's all really exciting stuff.
That's great. And I'm going to follow up with Heidi. You've heard quite a bit from Eric with regard to Fitbit and the research and data collected, but you also heard from Cassie about expanding it to beyond wearables to figuring out implantables. And I know as a person who has an implant and has had one for a long time, I want to get your perspective on not just wearables, but implantables, telemedicine, and how has that sort of transformed your life? And what are you doing to, how can we, again, leverage an advocate like yourself to help transform it even further?
Okay, well, first, thank you so much for having me. This is wonderful to be a part of this discussion, and I feel it's so important, and I'm grateful to MDIC for bringing the patient voice and the patient perspective to the table to be a part of these discussions. For me, looking at the world of just the patient continuum, think about it as the patient journey. And I was an athlete before I was a heart patient. So I had already understood how to train for something, how to set a goal, how to use data and information, talk to my coach, build a plan, execute to the plan, and have a successful outcome. Typically that meant crossing a finish line. Then I was diagnosed in 1983 with a rare heart arrhythmia. And this is before we had things like wearables. I didn't know how to take my own pulse. No one told me my heart was supposed to beat regularly. So when I went in for knee surgery, had my first EKG, and the piece of paper spit out, and my first data point was from the EKG, and the technician's eyes getting really big because 270 beats per minute wasn't normal. I'm thinking, oh, okay, now I know why I couldn't take my pulse. You know, and when I look back today with the access to consumer wearables for Fitbits, Garmin's, Apple Watches, all of those that give you that insight, that it doesn't become this shock that you have something wrong. You know, as Eric alluded to, is people are now using their consumer wearables to have these insights, capturing data in the context of living their day, instead of, once I had that data point that you have an arrhythmia, they canceled knee surgery, sent me to the coronary care unit. And I spent the next 30 days at UCSF hospital while they played guess the arrhythmia, only to be determined that at the time they didn't know what I had. They didn't have a way of fixing it, and I was resistant to different drug therapies. So the following year I became an experimental patient and had one of the first AV ablations. So once you have your, you know, kind of your original engine electrocuted, and I became 100% dependent on implantables, and those early implanted devices had really clunky heartbeats. And I didn't choose, I continued to choose to be an athlete. So I was still a professional windsurfer. And I'm looking at, how do I make this device in my chest give me the performance and the output of heartbeats that I can continue to reach those goals. And I started using, back in 1998, the polar heart rate monitor for cycling to determine if I was staying where I needed to be safe in pushing my pacemaker. And I would go in and I would explain to my physicians, here's what I'm feeling. And they would say, oh, no, you can't feel that. That's not possible. I'd go in, I'd show them the data. They would recreate the test on like the stress test in the lab, and they'd go, wow, you're right. I'm like, okay, good. So I've been doing this a long time, and I've been so excited to see the improvement. Fitbit, I've been an early adopter of Fitbit technologies, and back when it helped you track your activity, but today it captures so much great information, including just your whole cycle and things like that, which for women, how your body goes in and out of, your hormones has a big impact on what your heart does. That was another area that I couldn't get physicians to believe was happening. But now with data points from consumer devices, I can now go in and have data-driven conversations with my physicians. And that is incredibly impactful, because we're not treating feelings, we're starting with at least a place to begin a diagnosis. My implantable data, I am fortunate that my medical device company does give me access to my implanted data. I have a remote patient monitor device at home, which is great. As a patient, I feel safe. I have access to somebody looking at what's going on. But for me as an individual, as a person who's still an athlete, having access to those performance metrics and data that allow me to continue to set goals, like finishing Ironman and continuing to be a competitive cyclist, it's these amazing consumer devices that give me the ability to be accountable and aware of what's going on. And it's the implanted device that can then be optimized based on that data and what I'm trying to achieve.
Great. Thank you for that, Heidi. That's pretty incredible story, as well as the value that you're getting from that data. I'm going to go to Cassie for a moment and ask, and Heidi talked a lot about the data and around collecting data. So what are some of the regulatory considerations that you see in your world when it comes to the collection of data that we're getting from patients and physicians, and how does that sort of create hurdles, or how do we overcome some of those hurdles in the regulatory process? And then after that, we'll go to Bakul for his point of view on the regulatory aspects of it. So Cassie?
Thanks, Joe. And first of all, I want to say we could probably stop the panel right now after Heidi's story. I feel like she gave us a reason why we're standing up this digital health vertical. Thank you for sharing that amazing story. So to go to the regulatory considerations, I mean, I think this itself could be an entire panel. As it relates to as it relates to data coming from medical devices, obviously one consideration is related to the regulation of the software itself. How to develop regulations that support the iterative nature of novel software technologies while still ensuring the safety and effectiveness of these technologies. And this is what Bakul and his team are obviously doing through standing up the pre-cert model to develop the future regulatory model to provide a more streamlined and efficient regulatory oversight of software. But then getting to the data itself, other considerations, obviously data interoperability. And I think this is what we've already sort of talked about without using that word. How do we create interconnected data infrastructures? And also, going beyond the US international standards for data exchange and medical terminologies. How do we give appropriate and meaningful context to the data based on the user? And Heidi sort of touched on this as well. And I think this is key. Eric and I are coming at this from two very different landscapes, sort of where most of our products, not all of them, but most of our products the data goes to the physician. And Eric sort of the opposite of his goes to the consumer or the patient. And so how do we start blending that and think more broadly about, can we give sort of the appropriate context at the appropriate time and make it meaningful to whoever the user is. And do it in a way that's predictable and consistent as well. So users know what to expect. And just to touch on a few other considerations to think about is ownership. Who owns the data that's generated across the medical care continuum? Obviously, there's big privacy and cyber considerations. Trust. How do we build a system of trust in the AI technology? How do we engage users more in the development process? Patients like Heidi, how do we get them more involved? And also be able to explain AI, ML in a way that's meaningful and useful to build trust in the technology. And then finally, again, sort of how do we take steps to harmonize these approaches internationally as well?
Okay, Bakul, your thoughts? I think you're on mute, Bakul.
I'm on mute.
There you go.
As just listening to this conversation, I feel like, there are a few things going on here, and if I were to connect the dots between what Heidi was saying is educated patient, very involved in her own health, with data, right? I think so. Heidi is probably one of the North Star that every patient we want to sort of be. And then you can think about, like, to Cassie's point, things that Eric learned by instrumenting their products to collect information so they can do this research, can bring forward some of the insights there that they can, as a product developer, going to bring that to the table. And then if on the other side of the spectrum, when Cassie talks about contextualizing it, when there's an implantable, and that piece of information or data could be either extremely valuable or has to be contextualized, or otherwise it could be extremely dangerous. So I think there's this balance of finding how we can learn from this either extremes and say, instrumenting your products is going to give you better insight, especially when we start thinking about connectivity with 5G, which is going to be connected all the time. And then you start bringing insights from that data that's been generated that can be presented to the user at the end of the day. I'm saying user on purpose because it's not the patient or non-patient or the provider. It's anybody who uses the product or has interest in knowing something about that use of that product is going to need the insights. So I feel like using transparency of performance as one of the goals to sort of tell people what is the data telling you, making it easy, either using AI/ML tools or other tools to make it easier for people to understand to how to use that information, what insights it's bringing. It's going to be one of the key things that will drive engagement for the patient, engage and really, empowering clinicians to, I've heard somebody say, practice at the top of the license, which really makes it powerful. Now we're really taking care to the next level, right? And the patients are empowered, providers are actually working at the top, and we're with this data insights, you're going to create a new top for all of us. So I think just balancing that out, contextualizing, so it's not just driven by, worst case scenarios. I think just making sure that that's being very clear for people who are going to look at that. So that's one thing. The other thing I walked away from this conversation, I'm just thinking about it, is really need to see, how some of the regulatory infrastructures can be leveraged for indication expansions, the modifications that happen over time with the exposure to data. But then we have this other problem, I would say, ontology. Like we all scientists, so we all want to know exactly how the data comes in. It's structured always in a certain way, so we can make some insights out of that. And John used the word prospectively, including and Heidi into the conversation. We are big fans of prospective studies, but then there's this opportunity on the other side where we can start thinking about what does the retrospective aspect look like? What does the all comers aspects look like? How do you start using data leverage context into sort of reuse or learn from where we have been? And that's the power of real world. I feel like the work that's going on in MDIC on both the change control protocols that's happening in the diagnostic world, but doesn't have to be just diagnostic, it could be anywhere. If you start thinking about the applications or the pilot programs, and then in Nest itself could be applied to all other cases. So I'm seeing a lot of synergies where you don't have to sort of think about only certain things in one context. I think multiple contexts can also be leveraged. So that's how I'm sort of walking away from this conversation.
Great. So John and Jitesh, Fakul talked about synergies and things that are already active. So what are your thoughts right now in terms of what we're doing at MDIC within the digital science and technology, and certainly Jitesh, some of the programs that you're as the program director or manager of?
I can start off and then give it to John. I think Bakul just mentioned about the 5G, and we heard from Eric about Fitbit and other consumer devices coming into healthcare. But again, then Cassie and Heidi clearly articulated the need of regulatory paradigms and more collaboration and so on. So MDIC, but the DNA of MDIC is to enable this kind of collaboration and provide this platform. So let it be Fitbit or any other device coming into healthcare spectrum. So, they all face this challenge because this is technological advancement, and we need clarity on the, regulatory spectrum or validation methods and privacy issues. So I wanted to give one or two examples here. For example, we recently started a working group exclusively to focus on 5G enabled healthcare technologies. And traditionally, like Cassie mentioned, we are all, medtech companies. MDIC is made up of medtech companies, traditional manufacturers. But we realized that that model is not going to work. So we invited cellular providers, AT&T, T-Mobile, Verizon, chip manufacturers, and testing labs, all to be part of that working group and collectively figure out how we can solve these issues and come up with more innovative ideas. At the end of the day, what we wanted to do is make sure that there is a better chance of converting these ideas into some useful products for patients who are in need, like what Heidi mentioned here. So that was a working group which is open, and we are still accepting members, and they are working on, among other things, education for patients, education for industry, and then of course new tools which can be used for the validation and so on, and landscapes and gaps and so on. Another one also I wanted to highlight is we know augmented reality, virtual reality, extended reality is coming up, and there are a lot of healthcare application. So we recently stood up another working group, again with a broad collaboration from non-medical device sector. And again, we are trying to figure out, as Heidi mentioned, all these human factors or interface issues when it is in the healthcare spectrum compared to consumer space. Well, how can we, collectively work on those challenges? And we are not restricted to an US-centric approach. We are including members from other countries. And of course, all the MDIC working groups now have got the participation subject matter expert from FDA. So we have this, very unique approach to collectively solve the problem. And we are excited about the digital health vertical and looking forward to more ideas and brainstorming. And one thing we learned, or at least I learned from MDIC platform, is there are more things we can work in pre-competitive space with the competing companies and accomplish in a relatively short time span. John?
Yeah, thanks, Jitesh. Well, I was just listening with envy when Eric said that they ran an AFib trial with 455,000 patients in. And to Bakul's and Cassie's point, this is a paradigm changer. We've moved to population research from very controlled, prospective, randomized trials, for example. So I think one of the things that the MDIC team was really intrigued with bringing together the digital health initiative is making sure that we got constituents from different companies, not just from the med tech space, because I think there's tremendous value in what we can learn collectively when we bring these groups together, including Bakul and his team from FDA. But I think we're looking at a sea change in healthcare and how healthcare is provided. It's going to change the paradigm. I mean, the last PMA product I got approved in the same time it took me to get that product approved. There were 15 iterations of the Apple iOS system, for example. So, that our current regulatory system won't keep up with that sort of speed of development. So I think, it's a tremendous opportunity for us. And I think to get everyone involved at the outset is where MDIC can add tremendous value. And I think, to your point, Jitesh, in the pre-competitive space, we can set aside the competitive and proprietary information and tackle these problems head on. And I look forward to having Eric and his colleagues from the tech side at the table, because I think they can maybe shorten how we think about things or provide different solutions to things, how typically med device companies solve things. I've always told my team, having been in the device industry for 35 years, never underestimate the inertia against a new idea in a large established company. So hopefully by bringing this very diverse ecosystem together, we'll solve these problems quickly. And as Bakul said, get some quick wins to demonstrate why this is going to be valuable to the community. Joe?
Okay, thank you. And Eric, I want to go back to you for a moment. You had talked about some of the challenges about, maybe developing something in California, but does it translate in, in Alabama? Well, let's talk a little bit about maybe just getting access, providing access of this technology to maybe underserved, communities or underserved patients. What are some of your thoughts from your perspective on that?
So, underserved can mean many different things. There's a financial, there's kind of, historical, kind of racial bias. There is kind of just how far are you away from your doctor, and how often can you get to that medical visit? Fitbit in our global presence, community providers in India is so different from the way we do healthcare in the U.S. I think it's one of the things we've realized is, even within kind of our kind of user base, we have people buying, the $300 devices, and we've got people buying, $50 devices and less. And, part of it's, fashion, part of it's budget, if you don't make something that's appealing to somebody such that they don't use it or wear it or interact with it, then ultimately you can't drive health behavior change, which is ultimately what we're at Fitbit we're about. And whether it be kind of, sensing on your ubiquitous mobile device or kind of specialized hardware, I think that's all important. And the goal is to meet the consumer where they're willing to go, not trying to say, you've got to be here to interact with them. Not all of our users are as engaged as Heidi is. So how do we make sure a super engaged user like Heidi, we can kind of provide them all the data they want? But for someone who is much more passive in their healthcare journey, we're also providing a data collection platform that works for them, and then a level of analysis and direction that works for them, so that we can start getting them to become future Heidis, as it were, so they can understand and learn all that stuff. And Heidi, I apologize for putting you out there, but you've got.
I was going to go to her next, Eric. So I think, Eric, you touched on something I think is really important, and I think Jitesh even talked about too, the education portion of it. So Heidi, you've interacted with so many folks, whether it's industry or patients. What are your thoughts in terms of a way to educate patients a little bit more about what's available to them without turning them into experts, but certainly more aware of what's out there and how to use that technology?
Well, so when I think about why am I as engaged as I am? What caused me to want to understand data, to reach a goal? And it's because I was an athlete. I was an athlete before a heart patient. I didn't want to lose that part of me. And so I found tools that would help me continue to be what I wanted to be, who I wanted to be, and reach the goals that were important to me. And I think that's what's really important. There are 693 million connected activity trackers and devices, worldwide right now. Some percentage of those people are also patients. They are also engaged people. And what my goal of how do we educate more people, and this is the mission of Tour to Heart, is when you start by asking people what is their vision of a healthy, happy them, and what level of accountability do they want to have in staying well and healthy, then what are the tools that will allow them to get there? And that's when they're really interested in finding the right app and then the device that will connect to that app to give them the insights that they are then really compelled and interested in using. When we build tools and methodologies and devices and outcomes based on a perception of who we think the patient is and what they might want, then we just get people saying, well, I'm not compliant, or it's not useful, or I'm not engaged because it's not meaningful. So I'm excited that we're where we are right now with consumer wellness devices, allowing people to kind of decide what do they want to do in life, what's important to them, what are their drivers, then how do these tools and apps help them get there? And now we get to kind of merge that as we move towards the regulatory healthcare component. How do we bring that journey into healthcare? Because right now we have a lot of misaligned expectations. Healthcare's definition of a successful outcome oftentimes means nothing to the definition of the patient's idea of a successful outcome. So when we can begin to engage the patient with starting the conversation of what's important to you, how do you view success, and then help the physicians understand what devices, wearables, tools, digital health solutions and apps they can use to kind of bridge that gap from when they leave the hospital to when the person goes back to learn to feel safe with their body, trusted, build trust, and then re-engage in a life that they want to get up each day and be excited to live. So I think we have a lot of opportunities. There's a lot more people like me than I don't want to be 1 in a million. My goal is to help 1 million other people be like me. And I'm excited to be a part of these conversations where we can build those plans, those educational avenues and the tools.
Great. All right, so I'm going to put everybody on the spot. This is the lightning round now. So in the last few minutes that we have left, I'm going to ask each of you, and I'm going to start with Cassie. What are your closing thoughts in terms of what are the guiding principles that we should consider as we put up this digital health vertical? We've talked about the value of wearables and being able to translate a lot of that into implantables and the role of the patient. But if you could try to sum up sort of what would be your thought about this digital health vertical that we should walk away with today?
Yeah, thank you. So, just really quickly, I would say 3 different points. One is, how do we build upon each other? This panel was great to show how we're all coming at this from different perspectives, but it's important for us to find our common ground and collaborate so we can look to further innovation within digital health to improve patient health. And also, to build upon the work already being done and be sure that we incorporate voices across the healthcare continuum. So that was a big one. 2, I think we have a goal to do work that will ultimately help to promote further international harmonization as well. And then 3, finally, and most importantly, improving patient care must be at the forefront of our mission.
Great. Eric?
I think several things, again, coming at this from kind of consumer first lens and kind of having moved progressively more into the more traditionally regulated space. The first is, don't be afraid of your regulator. The fact I give my son a his allergy medicine each night, the fact that that's gone through a regulatory process, that's what gives me comfort. And there's kind of this assumption of regulatory equals red tape. And there's definitely some extra process, but I'd say most of it is actually just good development practices. It's what you should be doing when you're developing quality product. If your product is full of bugs, and forget regulatory, no one's going to use it. And same thing's true when you're in a regulated space. You can't ship something that's full of bugs, in part because the massive health impact. So we've got a regulator, but ultimately, on the other side, you have a regulator too. It's just your consumer. You're not going to sell things. So building good stuff is ultimately where it's at. And I have found the FDA very collaborative in asking good questions. Like, when we worked on our ECG AFib app, one of their questions was, what is the risk to the medical system? Like, what happens if you give people data and they don't know what to do about it? Can you overwhelm the medical system, and so they can't provide good care for people? And I think we came up with a great answer. I think it was data driven, and I thought it was a good question. So I think there's a lot of great collaboration to trying to lead the world to a healthier place. And then just finally, I think that we are at the we're at the very start of the race. I think that Nancy's mentioned AI a number of times, like where that's going, where the amount of data we're going to collect is rapidly going to overwhelm individuals and people, and we're going to need kind of smart algorithms to make intelligent understanding of it. I think it's going to be a really exciting time, and I think that it's on all of us to do the right thing for the users, where the end customer, the person whose health it matters, is all of us. It's ultimately our health at stake, and I think it's an exciting place to play.
It's great. But cool.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And fascinating conversation today. And I would say, adding to what Eric and Cassie just mentioned, I feel like this vertical will offer a place for us to start thinking about pre-competitively what it is that we can share with each other. I can already see, things that work really well in the world that Eric comes from, or at least his lens that he puts on as a consumers first, and then Cassie bringing the patient first and an implantable patient first as a lens. I think there's so many synergies that can be leveraged. I mean, if I were to imagine sort of a project to think about off the ground, you could almost do an inventory of, what can be exchanged, what practices can be exchanged, what methods, like what lessons learned from 2 angles, right? So one is leveraging what's worked out best, and then also avoiding things that has already been figured out what didn't work out, right? So I think both of those lenses make a lot of sense. And I think that the second thing is the power of MDIC's vertical to even connect the dots within MDIC's work streams will also help. Not that it's not happening already. I think it'll start to accelerate things in a really good way that brings people like Heidi to the table, bringing patient science and engagement sort of efforts to the table as well, and sort of bringing it to a place where diversity of sort of ideas and sort of the efforts that are going on can really lead to a place where industry, patients, providers walk away with something that's valuable for them from each perspective. So I feel like that's what it seems like in hope here. And from a regulatory perspective, I can say, you know, if we can get the community to agree on certain things, it's a much easier sort of way for us to start taking that input and saying, yes, that's a commonly understood thing. People understand this. We don't need certain expectations. The expectations are already there, and people agree on that. So I feel like there's lots of synergy here between all the stakeholders here that we're talking about, and I think it'll just lead to some better outcomes.
Terrific. Go back to you, Heidi.
So final thoughts. Well, you have to remember, I am really excited and happy that Bakul and the FDA are doing the work that they're doing, because I run on, every heartbeat every day for the rest of my life is dependent on a little metal box implanted in my chest. And I really kind of want to make sure that that works. It's been vetted, it's regulated. And even though sometimes I would like features and functionality to come out a little quicker, I also am really glad that I can trust and depend on the box and my pacemaker. And it's been doing a great job. So it keeps me alive. The consumer wearables and the apps that I have access to, those are the tools that give me the information for me to live this amazing life. I get to dream big. I get to accomplish goals. I get to trust in, that everything is working as intended. And if there is an anomaly that can become an alert, I can quickly communicate that. So the two worlds together are what make my personal life, something I'm, again, really excited to wake up each day, do something great, and hopefully inspire others to do the same.
Terrific. And so before I shift gears to John and get his closing thoughts, I want to thank everybody from the panel for your insights, your comments, your dialogue, and the transparency. Certainly, that's one of the cornerstones of MDIC is being able to have these conversations in a very transparent way. So, John, closing remarks from you.
Yeah, I just want to thank you, Joe, for moderating, and to the panel members. I think it's always really encouraging when we get this sort of participation from some very busy people, obviously, but I really appreciate it. And I made a note as I was listening. I think it's really important that we don't duplicate effort and leverage best practices from the respective stakeholders. So to Bakul's point, that's what we're doing actively within clinical science and technology, is looking at the synergies across programs. Bakul, to your point, I think it's really critical that we don't duplicate effort. And so just want to thank everybody for their participation today. And hopefully this will be the prelude to a kickoff meeting that we want to schedule in the fall, and we'll reach out to you respectively. Thanks.
Terrific. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so I think we're now live with our full panel and with the audience as well. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone that registered and participated in the pre-recorded session. We do want to apologize for some of the technical difficulties, but again, I think there was a couple of hiccups along the way, and I think we worked through those really well, and we were able to monitor a lot of the questions, and I think overall very successful tape session. We're going to go to the live Q&A. I'm joined with all of my panel members, Eric, Jitesh, Bakul, Heidi, John, and Cassie. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to start with a couple of questions. And I think the first question I wanted to present is Pierre's question, and this will go to Eric and Bakul. In terms of, there are many issues raised so far in the overview and in the tape session with regards to duplication of effort, cybersecurity, engagement of patients and communities, data stewards, accountability, and health research. But shifting from a proprietary paradigm to an open paradigm offers completely different perspectives. So how do we view how do we consider the role and place of open source technologies in this new paradigm, and are relevant open source stakeholders part of this ecosystem? So Eric, I know your thoughts on sort of the open source and Google's open source and thoughts there?
Yeah, so I think that to me, it's less about kind of traditional open source and more sharing best practices. I'd say the FDA does a great job of sharing a bunch of best practices, and also gathering together groups of people who traditionally consider themselves competitors to work on aligned best practices documents that then get shared out. I know it's been part of the pre-cert program has been like a lot of these combined, groups that traditionally Fitbit would consider highly competitive. We're working combined on best practices because we all want to have an equal playing field. That said, I think that if you look at, while these are best practices, I don't think there's a one size fits all solution for a lot of these problems. You mentioned cybersecurity and other areas like, how do you get, what kind of telemetry does your system collect? Very different types of systems gather different information, which means you've got to figure out based on both the risk factors for the type of thing you're producing, where, a mass consumer product like Fitbit, the risk is not necessarily that we're going to kill somebody, but might overwhelm the healthcare system. Whereas you imagine a product that is implantable, that's in a few tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, that is a very different type of risk thing, and it's also collecting different telemetry. And so while you take these general paradigms, you still then have to craft something that fits the type of product and the type of solution you're providing.
Great. Bakul, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Eric covered it nicely. And if you think about, open source, it comes in two flavors, right? So open source in a traditional software world, and when you talk about open source, it's really community built products where people are adding their use experiences and sort of knowledge to this common place. That's one way to think about it. And the other part is the best practices part, where you're doing pre-competitive work to sort of get the best standardization in place, so people can sort of build from that common knowledge, so they don't have to invent the wheel. I think both have a place in where we are thinking about going. I think open source from a product perspective, if you take the traditional software model, that uses that can use GitHub to then download and create an instance of it, I think that makes a lot of sense. Cybersecurity and especially can sort of be leveraging those knowledge that happens in one sector can be transferred to others. So I feel like there's a place for it. I feel like we need to start thinking about what those mechanisms and channels can exist to share not just best practices, but also at a granular level of instances, or pick cybersecurity as an example and say vulnerabilities happening in factory floor automation using the same operating system can be also affecting medical devices. That knowledge sharing could actually go very long ways as well. So I think there's a room for that. There's room for that.
Right. Thank you. The next question is from Anil. How do you vision the future of interoperability of devices to build a better overall health picture, which will help physicians collaborate to diagnose and treat? And then he comments about how much he enjoys and loves the Fitbit. So Eric, there's a shout out to you guys at Fitbit. So Heidi, Cassie, your thoughts in terms of Anil's question?
Sure, I'm going to jump in. One, because I use a lot of devices, not only the implanted one, but I think of myself as an athlete first. So the wearable data that I get from my Fitbit and my Garmin, and how I use Strava for interpreting data and doing analysis on segments that I've, performance and time of day to take a pharmaceutical have all sort of led me into why can't all the data be in one place so that my implanted data, my health and wellness data all comes together. And then, of course, to the point of how do we not drown the healthcare system with data, but if there's insights that become actionable, and this becomes my way of collaborating and communicating more effectively with my cardiologist and my care teams, and then from a feeding back information, real world patient data back to the pacemaker companies and manufacturers, really sort of providing a more holistic view of what and who I am as a person, as a patient, and what I would like from my device and what kind of an outcome I would like to have from my condition.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Heidi. I don't have much to add to what Heidi just said. Sort of coming at this both from someone that works in the medical device industry, but also someone who's lived my entire life with a chronic condition. I see this as sort of, as Heidi said, the ability for us to be more efficient, and inform as we're connected to more and more devices, as patients, for us to get extra analyses, for us to be able to use that data to potentially, understand better our condition, and to have a more educated, discussion with our doctor. I think of someone, and I'm speaking of someone now as a patient and not as someone that works for the medical device industry, but I think of how much information is lost because I have to recreate it each time for my doctor. And so if we can start having our devices speak to each other in a smart and safe way to build upon each other, to build, analyses that both the patient can have access to and the physician, I just think it's going to, do so much for healthcare to make us, smarter with our own condition, and also provide a new window into things that we may be missing as patients or, potentially our physicians because that data is lost.
Okay. I have a question before we go to Naveen's question, kind of a build on Cassie and Heidi, your response. Is there a risk to too much data confusing patients and physicians? Do we get to that point? And how do we sort of meter that and measure that and monitor that? What are your thoughts?
So I can just jump in real quick. Yes. And I think that goes back to sort of during the panel of, I think some of the work we need to do within this digital health vertical is figuring out, how do you give the appropriate data at the appropriate time with context? I mean, I think that's the most important thing is we can't look at the data that's coming out of the device and say, we're creating standards across for all users. I think even among patients, there's different types of patients too that are more involved in their healthcare and less involved. And how do we provide the appropriate context so that they can utilize it and make sense of it and then act upon it appropriate? Because obviously there's a risk of too little information and too much information to cause action or inaction. So I think that will be some of the work that will be important for us to start thinking through of how we can sort of through appropriate labeling provide appropriate context to the user.
And my thought on that is we are finally at a place where we can generate a lot of data. So if I put my old Google Cloud hat on, it was 5-6 years ago we were trying to find data sets that were large enough in order to train AI models. We now have a lot of data, and that data, if we can begin to build the models to track the anomalies that can be found within all of this data, those anomalies become the alerts, and those alerts become the actionable components that we're interested in, both as a patient and as my physician. That's where we're starting to build precision medicine at scale in a cost-effective way. So the fact that we can create the data, we can collect it, let's begin to leverage a lot of these cloud infrastructure platforms and really focus on building good models and incorporate machine learning and AI into, sifting the haystack to find the needle. But that needle is now personalized and customized for what's important to me as an individual and the outcome and the lifestyle I want to live. So I think we have lots of opportunities if we don't drown first.
Okay, great. So let's talk a little about, Cassie, you talked about the patients, the engaged patients, the knowledgeable patients, the patients that are aware. There's a question here from Naveen that says, what are the things that manufacturers and regulators do to encourage passive users to actively use and benefit from the technology? And I think this kind of was in the context of when Eric was speaking about the benefits of Fitbit. For those that are using Fitbit and leveraging Fitbit, but not every patient is leveraging it like Heidi is, but then there are patients that have a Fitbit that may not be taking full advantage of it. So what are some of your thoughts there? I'll look at maybe Eric, and then we'll go to Cassie and Bakul on that one.
Yeah, so I think there's several areas. I don't know how many people have gone to doctor, once a year, once every 5 years, however many times you go to your doctor. Doctor tells you something, you promptly goes in one ear and out the other. So I think first of all, especially in the consumer space, developing that level of trust. I think that in some ways the most powerful thing about Fitbit, something as an engineer I underestimated, was the value of the brand, the fact that people then trust what we say, and kind of building that partnership. I think the next thing is understanding and ideally giving people information without having them realize that you're giving them information. And so meeting them where they are. They might be like Heidi, a super engaged user where I need to show plots, I need to show trends, and I need to show lots of detailed data, where she's going to be able to kind of pull in external sources that I don't have as Fitbit and be able to figure things out. For other people, you need to give them direct insights. And so other people, it might be like, if you tell them something directly, they just will reject it. They don't want to hear that. But if you let them connect the dots themselves, they internalize. So, I love Dan Ariely's behavioral economics books. And so I think there's a huge amount of that in terms of medicine. How do we get people to actually listen and get healthy? Health is a hard work, and how can we make it easier for them? And how do we make it not hard work? And how do we make it fun? And how do we play into human nature in that? And I think that's going to be a huge part in kind of engaging those people where they don't realize they're being engaged. And also then making it cheap and accessible, I guess, would be the final part.
Great, thank you. Bakul, your thoughts?
I would say, I think, building upon what Eric just said, I think there's a value proposition here. To think about what's valuable for patients, it's the feedback and sort of the instant, and we as humans are all, at least I'll speak for myself, like instant gratification is like one of the key things that we all focus on. If we don't see results, then I think it's really hard for us to sort of hook ourselves onto those aspects, right? So there's this usability part, there's an economic part, there's probably the feedback mechanism and the value mechanism for us to be engaged with the healthcare system. When Eric's example of we go to a doctor once, so often, maybe once a year for some, once a quarter for others. And I think there's lots of things happening in between those visits. And I think not just waiting for those events to happen when we go visit a clinician, but also having that feedback mechanism for people to see, like, what is it going to be useful? But I was just going to make a comment, and I think this ties into the previous discussion that Heidi and Cassie were having, is I think the information is going to help people be more engaged. It has to be less intrusive, because healthcare today is a special task that you have to go do outside of your daily routine. And I think the more it can become as part of daily routine or daily lifestyle, then it gets easier and easier. I mean, that's the whole goal, and that's the whole promise of digital health, is to sort of become part of your daily lifestyle. So I think the more we do that, and the last piece is the information that's presented. Not everybody's going to want to know everything about their product, about their health at all the time, right? So, but if I know I've talked to many type 1 diabetic patients, and they're And pretty much all of them have talked to our data junkies. They want to see exactly what's happening with the CGM, and they manage it. And because it's an instant thing for them, is they have to be on top of it. But not every condition is going to be like that. So I think it has to be contextualized a lot. It has to be served to those who desire it, but not stop from not create a rule that is just binary. You can't have it or you can't have it all. That's not going to work. So it has to be a contextual, on demand, available so people can get it. I think I saw a comment on the chat which says new generations are going to be more tech savvy and more data savvy. I think that's pretty true, but that also will differ, and that gradation between your tech savvy people wanting data versus wanting insights will be very different. So I think the fluidity and availability of data needs to be there, or information needs to be there, not data, I shouldn't say that. Information, and then how it's served and how it's pulled by patients will make them more engaged.
So Cassie, I'll go to you quickly with regard to, you represent a medical device manufacturing company that does have a lot of, real-time patient inputs. Bakul talked about diabetes. Your thoughts with regard to those patients and, incentivizing, or those that are less active or more active?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to add quickly to what Bakul and Eric have already said, I think that the more we can seize upon sort of collecting patient input from the early stages, and we're already sort of doing some, and FDA is, I should say FDA is doing a lot in this area. The more that we can encourage patient input from development, through post-market, and making sure that we get sort of diverse patients too, for who the device is indicated for. I think the more that we can do work on this to get their voice in it, because I think sometimes you do not get sort of the patient feedback because we may not have, industry or whoever the device manufacturer or user may not have gotten the diverse patient input. And so I think the more that we can collect that will help. I think also education, the more that we can get out to the communities to provide the education on the benefits of the device. We've spoken a lot. Sometimes all that patients hear or get alerts on are the risks, the problems that happens, but they don't get as much education about the benefits for their health and how that continues to grow. So if we can continue to educate the patient and continue to get their input as a benefit risk, differs through post-market, that will be really helpful as well.
Great, thank you. Jitesh and John, I'm gonna look to you at this next question. It says, are there any good white papers that you would recommend on the subject? And where can entrepreneurs and early stage startups find the appropriate resources when thinking about digital health ventures? Your thoughts on that, Jitesh, with the work that you're doing? And
so MDIC, we haven't yet produced any white papers on digital health, but I just want to comment here that all the resources for device or resources that MDIC has produced in general on the medical device and diagnostics side, they are all freely available as resources to download. I also wanted to, before I turn it over to Bakul, actually Bakul might be able to shed more light on some of the white paper and the guidance document that FDA has released, and he may want to highlight on it. But I just want to add a few other things about MDIC. We were having the discussion about how we can share open the best sources or best practices as an open source material and so on. I just have an example, a new example on MDIC work platform where we are working on cybersecurity benchmarking. Of course, we are using some of the maturity models from the existing frameworks. But one of the participants in a manufacturer, their internal benchmarking mechanism or the tools and the framework they developed or customized, they gave it to the rest of the group so that this can be now widely adopted or widely utilized. So the MDIC platform is providing this kind of option for open sourcing some of the best practices that we were discussing. Again, I would recommend anybody here to review our resource portal, So a lot of resources right from early feasibility studies, cybersecurity, and so on. And I'll turn to Bakul for digital health specific guidances or white papers. Bakul?
Yeah, thanks, Ritesh. And I think it's a good question for folks who are looking um, um, to do or venture into digital health and the work that's been already done. You should go, one, I think, look at the guidances that FDA has published. It's all available on fda.gov/digital health. And the Digital Health Center of Excellence actually has a really good set of resources, multiple pages. And it not only includes sort of the guidances that we publish, but also sort of includes some of the work that we're currently working on. So it actually helps you understand where we're heading as well. That's number one. And people, since 2014 onwards, we've been sort of also helping entrepreneurs who are trying to understand what FDA's position is in this space. And it's an evolving, emerging, and we are building it with a lot of input. And we have this service from FDA that we provide today on an ongoing basis. If you write an email with your questions about FDA's position or FDA's view on what their product or what their functionality is and whatever policies are, we will get back to you. And the email address is digitalhealth@fda.hhs.gov, and that's the best way to sort of reach us. In addition to that, I think there's other resources that we also work with, like through collaborative communities, that helps us stay engaged with the communities at large. And I think that's really another way to sort of be plugged into the work that's happening and the work that's already happened.
Okay, great. John, something that came up in one of the responses was the engaged patient and the value of getting patients engaged early. And we've talked about it internally, making sure that we're encouraging the work of bringing patient insights to the process early. Did you want to comment a little bit about what MDIC has done and already doing and will continue to do in terms of early engagement of patients and early insights from patients?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. MDIC has another adjacent program called Science of Patient Input, where we actively seek for patients to provide their input and perspective on various things. And the work product we've produced related to that program, as Shitesh said, is freely available on our website. So, and the reason we brought Heidi into the picture for this panel was for the very same reason. We want to get Heidi as an educated and engaged user involved in this initiative right from the get-go. And I think one of the big challenges is going to be for, I look at the volume and velocity of data that we consume. I just happened to see a movie the other day where we have more computing power in our phones than was used to get man on the moon. So I think one of the things as we, experience this tsunami of digital health data is how it gets packaged to the various users on the backside, whether they're of Heidi's disposition where she wants to know everything about it and she'll distill that. And is there a role there for companies to get engaged on how this data gets used? And as AI and machine learning gets more refined, how these huge data sets get incorporated into personalized medicine. So I think if we don't have the patients engaged, that's going to be a huge miss. And I think the device industry and companies like Ericsson are actively looking at how they're going to incorporate that into the solutions they provide. So I think that's going to be critical.
Right. So we've got a couple of minutes left. Closing thoughts very quickly. Start with Eric. Any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
Sure. Actually, really quickly on the how do you as an entrepreneur, how do you learn? I'd also recommend reaching out to fellow entrepreneurs. It's amazing how generous they are with their time, because we've all benefited from other entrepreneurs. I see there's a lot of questions on AI. I think there's this perception that AI is this magic thing. You wave over some data and just magic answers pop out. Highly labeled data sets are really important for AI. So there's a lot more involved in that. There's some really interesting books about that as well. So I think the first thing is figuring out how do you standardize that? How do you make sure it's repeatable? How do you make sure you've got a broad enough cross section? Like this isn't trained on white males and doesn't work with African-American females, for example. So I think there's a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done in laying that common groundwork for AI. And I know the FDA also has a whole kind of process on how do you make sure these models are repeatable for people. I'm actually more excited about personalization in the short term. I think that that personalized medicine is really exciting.
Great. Thank you, Eric. Bakul?
Thanks, Joe, and thank you for this panel. I think this has been really, I mean, I learned a lot with all the discussions. I just want to say one quick thing that we didn't touch on a lot is, as we start the journey on digital health, although everything's exciting, I think we have to also keep in mind sort of the diversity and equity of information and data that Eric just talked about is included as we start thinking about which, obviously makes sense for us to do from a trials perspective, but also reaching those populations that are underserved and with rare diseases are actually going to be very much also instrumental in how healthcare is shaped in the future. And I think digital health technologies have a unique way to sort of reach those populations that we couldn't do in other places.
Great. Thank you, Bakul. Cassie, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm just very excited for the digital health vertical to start with this work, and we're already starting to build out some short-term and long-term goals. I agree that, the more that we can start figuring out how to utilize real-world data, especially allow it to feed into, pre-market submissions and utilize in a smarter way, I think it will be, allow us to tap into more diverse populations and provide us with new insights. So I think that will be really helpful as we sort of look towards this digital health vertical for one of the work streams that we'll want to look into to stand up.
Great, thank you. Heidi, your thoughts?
My thoughts, well, it kind of comes from, as a patient, being a patient is just a part of who I am. I'm mostly a person, and I have a big life, and I have lots of interests. So my engagement and my desire for data and why digital health tools are so important is it's the insights that I have in real time in the context of doing all the other things that I enjoy. And so the more information we have, and you'll find patients will be more engaged when you relate the data to not just, oh, look, you're still a patient, you're still broken, and this will tell you how broken you are. Instead, it's the data that tells you how much you're living and how close what progress you're making to living the life you want to get up for each day.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Jitesh, thoughts from you?
I think you're on mute, Jitesh.
Yeah, let me use this question in my last minutes to address the question from Catherine, actually. So everything we do at MDIC is collaborating, predominantly collaborating in pre-competitive space. So the digital health vertical that we are standing up is a prime example to identify what barriers we have. And even if there are barriers, beyond those barriers, what we can achieve by collaborating and bringing all these stakeholders, right from the patient insight to manufacturers to app developers and so on. So let it be digital health or other work groups at MDIC, that's our prime focus, and we invite you to inform us and help us in this effort.
Terrific. Thanks, Jitesh. And John, your thoughts about this highly action-oriented team and some goals for the future? Your closing thoughts?
Yeah, exciting times, I think. Bakul stood up the Digital Health Center of Excellence late last year. We've got tremendous interest from across the ecosystem. And I think the goal for MDIC operating in this pre-competitive space is to float all boats, right? So we produce product that's helpful across the entire ecosystem, from very small startups, 2 people in the back of a garage, to large multinational companies that Cassie's a member of. So getting in right on the front end of this in the wake of the pandemic, where I think digital health has been pushed to the fore and accelerated, I think it's very exciting times. And I think I agree with Bakul. We need some quick early wins, and then we can take on the bigger projects as we get traction. So I'm looking forward to it. It's very exciting.
As I am as well. Well, everyone, we went a little over. There's a couple of questions that we didn't get to, but we'll do our best to respond to those. And if there are any additional questions you might have, I believe there's going to be a link provided that you can also address some questions, and we'll respond to those as well. So again, on behalf of MDIC, the digital health vertical, as a patient myself, I appreciate the time that you guys provided, not only in the tape session, but in today's live Q&A. And it was a real pleasure to be your moderator. And as Bakul said, I learned a lot as well. And I'm looking forward to continuing the digital health initiative. We've got a lot to do. We've got those quick wins. As I mentioned, this action-oriented team, it's a pleasure to be part of the team. So thank you very much for your time, and we'll talk again soon.